This is Ask Joe number 198, the Nashville Tracking Session Edition. So you may be wondering, what is with the instrumental music here on the intro? That's a little odd. You're right, it is a little odd, but I want to explain what that is because it's kind of cool and kind of fun. So you may remember, if you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, or you subscribe to my emails and email newsletter and all that stuff, occasionally we do, actually we did this last month in March. We did a tracking day here in Nashville for the home studio corner crowd. So if you had a song and you'd like to have a bunch of really great musicians play on it, I set up a tracking day at a friend's studio. We hired in musicians, drums, bass, keys, acoustic, electric, and a couple others. One guy plays everything, so we had some fiddle and things like that. But ended up being really fun. We sold out the 10 slots, and so we recorded 10 songs that day. And this is one of them. They actually came in, brought the vocalist down to record vocals, and then I'm mixing that right now, this morning actually. And the point I want to make is, now, I understand, and I've been talking about this a little bit in my email newsletter as well. I understand that the whole reason you got into recording an audio was to do your own thing and to make your own music, right? So the idea of shelling out both money and control to have someone else record your music doesn't make a whole lot of sense for a lot of people, especially to have them do everything. But one thing that I've experienced over and over again, and honestly, it's becoming more and more true to me, even just in the last 6 months, and it continues to be so, is how important the performance and the recording is. I know I say this a million times, and you're probably rolling your eyes right now saying, oh, if he says get it right at the source one more time, I'm going to punch myself in the face. But it's more than just the get it right at the source thing. It's this idea that, for example, here's where I'm coming from. I was mixing this song this morning, okay? And there's vocals as well. I didn't include the vocal because I just wanted to play the instruments, the stuff that we recorded on that tracking day. And, I mean, as you could hear in that, it already sounds really great. And I'll give you a hint. It sounded that good when I pulled in the files and started working on it. I literally, if I opened up my mix session for you today, you'd see there's a fair amount of processing on the vocal because that's pretty typical, but there's just a little bit of compression here and there, a little bit of EQ here and there, and that's kind of it. And it sounds so good. I think I'm not here, this isn't a commercial for me to tell you to come hire us to record all your music, but it is a commercial for the power of having good musicians play on your stuff. If you're in a band and you've let 3 of your buddies in the band and they're horrible musicians, don't expect when you go to record something for it to sound anything better than horrible. And don't expect for you to be able to buy the right plugin bundle or the right tutorial series that will help you make those bad musicians sound good. It's just never going to happen. The more you can wrap your head around this, the more, if even just one time you can experience a session like this, really good musicians who know their instruments really well. And I know it's a little self-serving because I'm the one playing the acoustic guitars, but I'm a good acoustic guitar player and I've got good instruments and I've got good technique and I record very good acoustic guitar tracks. It's just a fact. And my acoustic guitar tracks sound a lot better than a lot of the ones I receive from people who are just getting into it. So the point being, it's not that we're on some elitist level and you must give us all your music and have us record it. It's more, if you're not focusing in on and really honing in on and being a little bit of a stickler for really good recordings and really good performances and using really talented people, you're always going to miss out and you're always going to fall short and you're always going to spend hours and hours trying to fix it in your fancy software when it was never right to begin with. So I could go on. I could literally talk about this for hours and hours, but I won't. I wanted you to hear just another example of what getting it right at the source sounds like, and how that I was able to get that mix in probably 30 minutes. If you take out the vocals, I got that mix in about 15 minutes, and then the vocals take longer in kind of getting everything together, but the overall tone was already there, already baked into the tracks. And what's fun is, like, they hired me to mix it, but some of the clients go mix it themselves, which is great. And their mixes are going to sound great because they are already starting from such a good place, if that makes sense. So anyway, sermon over. If you'd like to talk to me about having some of my friends play on your music, please reach out to me, joe@homestudiocorner.com. But more than that, reach out to your friends and people you know that are better than you and see how you can get them involved, because I think you'll be surprised at what a stark difference it makes. I can tell you this day in and day out for years, and until you experience it for yourself, you won't quite get it. But once you get it, it's going to be hard to imagine ever going back to the way it was. Boom. All right, that's enough of me. Let's talk about you. Those of you here on the live chat, you can ask questions now. I saw a couple questions come through. Also, don't forget to follow me over on Facebook, facebook.com/Joe Gilder Music. That's my handle on Twitter as well. And then on YouTube, I'm Home Studio Corner, or you can just search my name. I will pop up. Come over there, subscribe, get a like. I put out a new video every weekday, so if you haven't been following along there, if you don't have the YouTube app on your phone, or you're not heading to the YouTube homepage occasionally, I used to not do that, and I missed out on a lot of stuff. So there's some cool stuff. When you subscribe, you'll see all the stuff that I'm doing, and there's a lot of cool stuff that might be helpful for you. So check that out when you get a chance. Let me go to get the Facebook questions first, and then I will dive into the questions over in the live stream. I see Sam Kanak is here and Kern Ramsdell, two of my boys. What's up, fellas? Okay, so here's a question from Ben Holmes over on Facebook. He says, how do you handle de-essing in Studio One? As it doesn't have a specific de-esser, do you just use a multiband compressor, or do you have some sort of, and if so, what kind of settings do you use? So I use a multiband compressor for my de-esser, and I've got a preset that I've made that is essentially, it used to be 2 bands of multiband, the bottom band off, the top band on, and it's set to around 5K and up. So it's only compressing the upper frequencies. Really fast attack, pretty quick release, and then just adjust the threshold, so it's really just compressing the highs. That's how I do it. You can also use the normal EQ and set it up as a, it's got a filter built into the stock compressor has a built-in sidechain little circuit that you can tell it to listen to certain frequencies to trigger compression. And that can work as well. The only problem with that is it's listening to the high frequencies, but it's compressing all the frequencies. So that may or may not be the way you want it to work. I tend to just like to work on the highs as we go. As far as my settings for using the multiband compressor, I've altered that just in the last month or so. I've added another band. So I've got a band from 2 to 4 kilohertz that's more aggressive, and then above 4K that's less aggressive. So same settings, just different thresholds that I adjust. That 2 to 4K has just been killing me in vocals lately. So I've got a multiband there just to smack it and put it in submission, and that seems to be working pretty well. So that's my answer to your question. Chris McNamara, who I think is here on the live chat, but he asked over in Facebook, what are some ways that you can go about dealing with poorly recorded tracks, given that the re-recording is not an option? I've been working with a vocal with crazy bad room reflections, and I keep ending up EQing the life out of it. Is there no hope? I think there's 2 ways to think about it. In the one sense, yes, there's no hope. You're not going to make that badly recorded vocal sound better. Now, I get sometimes re-recording isn't an option. Maybe the person passed away. Maybe the person lives in another country. Maybe you're not friends anymore, but you still want to mix the project, whatever the case may be. Bad recordings absolutely do happen. And what you have to do is realize there's only so much you can do in mixing and EQ. You can do some things, you can improve it, but you're not going to make it sound like a well-recorded vocal. It's just not possible. So I would say focus on listen to it as objectively as you can, and then just focus on what's the worst thing about this vocal, or the worst 2 or 3 things about it, and try to fix that. The other thing I'll do if I have a bad recording, and Listen, I'm not saying I record perfectly every time. You heard me just 2 months ago completely jack up the snare drum in my EP recording. So I'm completely capable of messing things up. And then in that situation, I wasn't going to go back and re-record the snare because it wasn't worth the time and effort and money that it would cost to do that. So I get that. For me, if I have a bad recording, I try to mask it with something else. If it's a lead vocal, then I may try to mask it with effects, like some reverb or delay. Or I may try to make it a little more buried in the mix with some more aggressive compression so that I hear the words, but it's not super loud. Those are the kind of things that I would do. Other than that, it's really, it's funny. I have this weird, this thing that happens with me when I get tracks from clients who've hired me to mix something. And when the tracks are bad, I have this weird thing in my brain that's actually relieved because now I know this mix is never going to sound that great. So it's not my fault. If I get amazing tracks and I ruin them because I mix too much, that's on me. If I get crappy tracks, then the best I can do is do a little bit better polish on the crappy mix. So it's going to be a crappy mix. And once I can kind of just realize that, and it actually makes it a lot easier. I mix it pretty fast because I know I'm just not, they're maybe expecting me to make their track sound like this popular professional recording they just listened to, and it's just not possible. So you have to lay all those expectations out with clients of like, hey, this guitar was really muddy. I did a few things to make it sound better, but that's as good as it's going to get given the recording that you gave me. Don't shame them out, but just say, hey, these are the facts. Hey, that vocalist is out of tune. I can make the tone be good. I can use some EQ and compression to make it sit really well, but ultimately he's flat no matter what I do, right? In that situation, I'd probably just tune it and be done with it. But you get the idea. Next Facebook question from Joe Birchley says, reverb versus delay for depth. I find reverb makes things muddy unless used sensitively. What's your technique for adding 3D nature to your stereo sound? First thing is, I never think of, there's so many people who say, mixing is three-dimensional. You've got width and depth and length, or I don't know what they call it. I don't think of it that way. I don't think of adding depth to the mix. I'm just way more simple than that. I think these drums would sound good with reverb on them. Hey, I'd like to hear some delay on that vocal. I almost never am trying to add depth to something. Maybe I'm just dumb, but I just think I know what reverb sounds like because I've used it a bajillion times, and this would sound good with that reverb. And then I add it. Now, to your question about muddy reverb, I've got an answer that's probably more practical and super helpful and could possibly transform your mixes just by doing this one thing. What is it? You've just got to EQ your reverb. So many people set up their reverb on a send and they send off to it and then they just accept the sound that the reverb gives back to them, and so it might make you not choose 8 different reverb presets because they sound too muddy. But guess what? Just throw an EQ on there. In my mixing template, I've got reverbs set up, 2 or 3 at this point. Each of them has an EQ directly after them with a high-pass filter at 200 hertz because I know there's nothing 200 and below that I need more of in my mix, especially from a reverb. And occasionally I'll go in and have to EQ it more if there's something in like the 500 hertz range that's building up, or maybe it's a little too bright on the guitars and I have to EQ those down on the reverb. That's your solution. EQ your reverb and you'll get the space you want without any extra muddiness, and you will love me for it. Boom. Johnny says, I had a client send me a somewhat overloaded vocal. It was a protest type song, so I gave it a megaphone style EQ and distortion to cover it. Absolutely. Distortion covers a multitude of wrongs. Just ask any guitar player. Wes Deloach is here. What's up, brother? He says, I'm having trouble getting and staying motivated in the studio lately. Any tips for me? I feel like I talked about this. Maybe someone can help Wes and tell him what episode it was. A few episodes back, somebody asked about it, and I think I went on a bit of a rant. But I think there's a million answers, and maybe none of them will actually be helpful. But for me, what motivates me, and that's really all I can answer, is like how I get motivated, because I get demotivated just as much as anybody else, right? I'm not I'm not sitting here reading affirmations every morning and getting jazzed up and fired up to do a podcast. Like some days I don't want to do this podcast, right? Today I did, but some days, I may go to lunch with my wife and I'm like, I got to get back. I got a podcast at 1, and I'm a little resentful of you and your questions. Not really, but you know what I mean? Like I just don't feel like doing it because I have to set it all up and sometimes it doesn't work right. So for me, to be motivated, you got to have a bigger picture that you're aiming for, it seems, right? So, if it's a bigger ultimate goal. So, Wes, I know you, I know your band. If you guys haven't checked out the band Driven Astray, great band. I'm trying to remember the website. It's a drivenastrayrocks.com. Really great, just heavy band. Wes is the lead vocalist and I guess the only guitar player. I've mixed a few of their songs. We mixed one in Dueling Mixes a while back. I mixed another one for my speed mixing course. They're really good. So, I think for me, I'm motivated by a few things. I'm motivated by a desire to create. And when I'm not creating, I get bogged down. And so I have this need to create, kind of a God-given need to create. Now that can mean create a video as much as it could mean create a song like I was doing yesterday. What's really motivating for me is finishing things. And actually, because if I can create all day, but if I'm not sharing it, it doesn't feel real. And in a weird way, it feels like I'm not actually doing anything of consequence, if that makes sense. If I spend a year working on an album and never actually share it with anybody and never finish it, it's super depressing. So I think speed is, I just saw a video this morning that talking about which is better, speed or quality, and the guy was like, absolutely speed, because quality is subjective. You could release an album, Wes. So for example, your band, I don't know exactly how you qualify yourself, but just pretty hard rock. Heavy stuff, but it's still melodic and pretty is probably offensive. It's still very good. I like to listen to it. But there are some people who will not like your style of music. Just like there are some people who do not like country. Some people do not like hip hop. And a few people like them all. Some people don't like the Beatles. Other people want to kill them for saying they don't like the Beatles, right? It's so subjective. So the only way to get let me rephrase that. What that means for me is I need to stop worrying about making my music perfect and just get it out there. Because the people who like it will like it. The people who don't, won't. And there's nothing I can do to change really either of those people's minds. I just need to create what I was made to create. Now, yes, I want to get better. Yes, I want to improve. Yes, I'm hoping my EP that I do next month is going to be better than the one I did 3 months ago. Lord, please help me not mess up the snare drum again. But even if I don't get better, in a way, I will always be getting better because I'm always releasing more music. I mean, so all my music is now on iTunes, Apple Music, Spotify. So go listen. I to my own detriment, I'm telling you, go listen to my album. Start with the first one, Out of Indiana, that was released in 2010. Okay, and then listen to Help of the Helpless in 2013, Better This Way 2014, and then the stuff I released last year and this year. It's different. Everyone has its own story, but if you flip from the 7 years ago album to the current one, chances are you're going to think that current one sounds better, whether it's musicianship or mixing or recording or production or the fact that I didn't use Easy Drummer, whatever the case may be, it's going to sound better. And so for me, that's inspiring to know that what I'm releasing now is probably going to be good and people are going to like it, but it's another stepping stone to the next great thing, or maybe to the great thing that I'm, maybe I've got to write 60 more songs and release 10 more albums, and then six more albums, and then that 7th album, the next song after 60 is going to be the one that's going to explode and is going to reach a lot of people. I just don't know, and stuff like that excites me. The fact of creating a body of work, thinking back to why I got into music to begin with, and thinking forward to where I'd like for myself to go. Those are things that are motivating as well. I'd love to play Ryman Auditorium. I know I've kind of talked about that more. Haven't talked about it lately because I've kind of fallen off the playing out live thing. But because that's in the back of my mind, that's going to eventually swing back around and get me pumped up and jazzed to go play some shows, whether they're just solo acoustic shows, online internet shows, or doing a tour. Those things excite me. I think we tend to get excited by things that scare us. So if there's something, Wes, for example, that you're avoiding finishing, you're avoiding doing, if you're EQing that vocal for the 1,000th time because you're scared to release that song because you're scared nobody's going to like it, I would say give yourself an hour, finish it, and put it up tonight. That's what I would say. Whatever the thing is you're scared of, I think you should poke on it. It's like a scab. You should mess with it. Instead of ignoring it and hope it gets better, dive into it, figure out what it is you're scared of, then do the thing, and then see what happens. It's like I said a few months ago, the worst thing you can do is fail. And failure is just a thing that happened. You can come back up and knock it out of the park the next time, or you might fail the next time, but failure is kind of an inevitable part of this process. And even then, it won't be a complete failure, right? Because there will be things that you did well, just like my album Out of Indiana. It's not a complete failure. I like the songs. And I like some of the performances, and I like some of the vibes. I don't love the mixes. I don't love the masters. I don't love the recordings of the acoustic guitar especially. So those are plenty of failures, but I think as a whole, it's something I'm still certainly proud of, and it's a snapshot of where I was 8 years ago, right? It's a long time ago. 8 years ago, I was a completely different person with completely different musical talents, but also a completely different person emotionally and from a maturity standpoint. So even releasing this music is almost like taking snapshots of who I am, and I can revisit that in the future. And to me, that's kind of cool. It's like, 20-year-old Joe probably had something to say that 30-year-old Joe needs to hear, right? Probably not much, because 20-year-old Joe was an idiot, but there may be a few things here and there. I write songs today that may speak to me more 2 years from now than they do today, but I'll never know that if I don't finish them and release them. So that was a really long, unorganized rant to answer a question that I don't even know if I answered. But Wes, I love you, brother. You're doing good work. Keep at it. Maybe even just me giving you a shout out for your band was enough motivation. I don't know. I'm not a motivational speaker. I'm a hack. Daniel says, when learning guitar, there was a moment when everything started to click and I learned something every day. Now I work a lot harder to make tiny improvements. Was there a moment like that when mixing? Daniel, the moment like that for mixing was kind of the first few times I had that revelation that I talked about at the beginning. I'm not sure if you were here when I played that song that we played. When I finally realized that I'm not a bad mixer, I've just been making bad recordings. That to me was exciting, because if you think you're a bad mixer, you may not know how to fix it. If you think you're bad at recording, you can fix that. If you're a bad guitarist, you can become better. If you're a really bad guitar player, you can find someone who isn't, and suddenly you just slap a mic in front of them and whatever they do sounds amazing, which in turn makes you better at mixing. That to me, hands down. I don't like to say like this is the one thing that did something, because it's almost never a one thing. But in this instance, that is kind of the one thing that has taken me way further in my mixing game is recording better. So, yeah, that's all I have to say. That and just a lot of repetition. Brain surgeon. Have you watched the movie Doctor Strange? Or is it just Strange? Doctor Strange. He's a neurosurgeon, right? And they ask him, like, how'd you become one? He said, through years of study and practice. They're like, it's the same way with learning how to open up portals to another dimension. Same thing with mixing. Maybe not exactly the same. You don't need a sling ring to open up a dimension, but maybe you do. Maybe I should come up with a sling ring for mixing. And Nadim makes a comment, which is a total commercial, but I'm going to say it anyway. He says, join Dueling Mixes. Play with the well-recorded tracks. That's kind of what I was referring to. When we started Dueling Mixes, we did some tracks of songs that we recorded, some songs from clients, but then members started submitting their music, and we would pick songs that were recorded well, and then I would realize just over and over, like, man, this is recorded so well, and members would start to see, hold on, I got a great mix of these tracks, and nothing changed in me. I just used better tracks, and suddenly my mixes are better. It's cool to see those lights go off for people. Faux show. Please give me some tips on mixing female vocals. A de-esser is your friend, especially in the 2 to 4K range. It just can get really annoying there. Listen to it through small speakers and earbuds, and all the annoying frequencies will come out even more. Fix those, and it'll probably sound better on all systems. Upper mids can be a pain with female vocals. Also, check out Sam Canuck. He's got a wife who's got a killer voice. And I'm sure he's mixed her voice a bajillion times. I've mixed male vocals more than female because I'm a dude and I mix my stuff a lot. So Sam will probably have some advice for you as well. Chris Raspberry, great name. Just finished setting up a studio. I have some M-Audio speakers. What advice could you give me for learning speakers and mixing? For learning speakers and headphones for mixing. Do a lot of mixing. Just do a lot of it. Listen to good mixes on those systems, and then also just do a lot of mixes. You're not going to get better. You can go right now and mix something today. You're not going to be better from doing that one mix. You go mix 30 songs. Yeah, you're going to be a little bit better. You do mix a song every week or every day for the next couple years. Suddenly now you're getting the vibe of it. But there's a work element involved. You just can't skip, As much as I want you to watch my videos, you're really not going to get better from just watching me. You're going to get better from doing it. Doing what I do maybe, but not just the watching, not just the learning. Do you use a sub in the studio? I don't. I have friends who do, but unless you're going to have your room professionally treated, I feel like a subwoofer just adds more problems than it fixes because it's adding more low frequencies. If your room doesn't handle low frequencies well already, you're just adding more stuff that it can't handle. That's why I steer away from them. If I was doing hip hop, then yeah, maybe I would because I need that extra bass just to feel what I'm doing. But my speakers have, they're dual 6s on each one, so they've got a lot of surface area, so I've got plenty of low end here. Favorite compressors and EQ. My favorite compressor and EQ is the stock one that comes with Studio One. I know that sounds like a line. That's just what I use day in and day out, day in and day out, day in and day out. It's how I use it that makes the biggest difference. Now that said, I've had the Wave stuff before. I've had the SSL bundles. I do really like the way the SSL bus compressor sounds. So I do like that. There you go. Mike says, what's up with undo in Studio One? I might make a few tweaks, but I don't see an easy undo to them. Any suggestions? I've never heard of any DAW giving you the ability to undo EQ moves. It'll let you undo things like deleting a track or possibly like writing automation, but like I move an EQ, then I hit undo. I've never known one to do that. So I'm guessing that's nothing new. That's just the way it's always been. Any advice for a blind person starting a home studio? You know, I mean, starting a home studio, whether you're blind or not, well, no, I would say it's just like doing anything else. Obviously, you're here on the live chat, Lewis, so you are very well versed in navigating the internet, given that you're visually impaired. So I would say getting into starting a studio is no different. The biggest thing is you need software that will play nicely with, I forget what it's called, but I know I've got a friend named Slough, Sessions with Slough. Remember that podcast? He doesn't do it much anymore. Slough Hallaton from New York, and he's legally blind. He can still see a little bit, but he can't read anything on a screen. So he's pretty much totally blind, and he runs a studio in New York, and he does well. But I know he has software that will read to him menu items and things like that. So when he clicks on, file, it'll read the selections that he's choosing so he knows what to click on, which, Lewis, I know you're probably already familiar with that. So you'll need a system that plays nicely with that. I know that Pro Tools does play nicely with that. So that's probably your best bet because most blind people I know who do audio are Pro Tools people, and I don't think that's an accident. So that would probably be where I would steer you. Studio One, for example, which is what I use from PreSonus, is great, but they're big on the visual and a lot of dragging and dropping, which I doubt would be super helpful in your world. So that would be the only real thing. Other than that, my advice to you would be the same as anything. Get decent equipment, but learn to use what you're using and make it happen. Oh, David says Reaper allows plugins, undo in plugins. So there you go. Another point for Reaper. All right, let me scroll back up. I'm sure I've missed plenty of questions. This is from Lee. What's your approach with fade in and fade outs in a mix? How would you fade out a song in a chorus, for example, in the end? Kind of a never-ending song, I would describe it. I just fade it out with the master fader usually. So I create an automation lane for the master fader, and I just draw in usually just a line from where I want it to start fading to where it stops, and then I adjust the curve of that line, which it allows me to do. So is it slow down more slowly at the beginning and faster at the end, or does it slow down pretty quickly and then the end of the fade is a little more drawn out? I mean, that's the way I do it. Or if I'm going to be mastering it, I may just leave it all there, and then when I'm mastering the final mix, it's a stereo file, I can just draw the fade like I would just on a piece of audio, which is essentially the same thing. So that is how I would do that. Nadim, my boy Nadim from Florida says, I see people are using limiters on tracks instead of compressors. What are the benefits tonally? And when would you use a limiter on a track, say like a bass or a vocal? I will use limiters occasionally because if I really am just trying to catch a peak and I don't really want any tonal changes, I'm not trying to really change the tone. It's literally that vocal keeps jumping through. That vocal keeps jumping out of the mix, and I know I just want to smack it down. I'll throw a limiter on there for that reason. But you could certainly do a compressor with a high, as high as it'll go ratio, fast as it'll go attack, and adjust the release, and you'll essentially have the same thing. A limiter, just in a lot of ways, is just easier. It's already set up to smack things down. So in those situations, I'll just drag it in there. For example, I recorded a guitar solo last week, and I really liked it. And I had a compressor pedal on my pedal board, but it let too much snap through. So when I would the pick hitting the string was too loud. So I could go in and manually draw all those down, like do a bunch of manual edits to fix that. But instead of doing that, I just thought, I'll just put a limiter on there. And so whenever I set it to where when those spikes came through, the limiter just smacked it back down, and it worked well. Those would be examples of where I use it. Usually on a vocal, if it's just too much, or something percussive that really needs to be caught quickly, like the sound of a pick on a guitar, I'll use it. But I don't use it a ton, if that makes sense. Musicsco says, I sound smooth, like a smooth FM radio DJ. You're listening to JGOL, all recording talk all the time. That little line was, thank you, Sam Canuck, for supplying the script for that. Yeah, I think I'd like radio. But with radio, you got to talk about stuff you don't want to talk about half the time, right? News, commercials. See, if I have a commercial, I'll just tell you to buy something of mine. Self-serving. Peter says, Joe, please describe your setup for recording your screencasts. Good question. Pete, I think you're a VIP member. Maybe I'm wrong, but I did actually a whole video series on how I set up my videos because it's pretty complicated. If you can't find it, let me know. I'll be reorganizing the VIP area soon so you can find things easier, because there's 500 videos in there? Maybe not 500, 300. It's a lot. And they're not organized terribly well. So my fault. I will organize those better. But essentially, I use a Studio Live mixer, and so my computer audio comes through here, this microphone comes through here, and then I've got a couple different pieces of software that allow me to record the main mix of this mixer back into the computer. So I use a software called Audio Hijack Pro that literally just says, take the main outputs of the mixer and send them to the Soundflower driver, which is a kind of an internal driver that's free. And then I set my input of my video software, or for example, this live stream, to the Soundflower driver, and that's how you're hearing me. So I can play audio, it goes through my mixer, and then everything that comes, what essentially would come out the main outputs of my mixer is what you're hearing. What's super cool, the way I have it set up, is I don't have my voice coming out my speakers, but I do have the audio coming out. And I also have a limiter on my main output. So my voice and everything comes through nice and loud on the videos and on the stream, but I'm not actually hearing that limiting as I'm listening to a mix and things like that. So those are nifty things that you really can only do if you have a mixer. So there you go. That's not applicable to probably 90% of the people listening, but I do get that question quite a bit from people wanting to do more videos, which I think is awesome. So you kind of have to figure it out given your system. If you don't have a Studio Live, then what I just told you probably doesn't apply terribly much. John says, I do some live mixing. I'm not a musician. I wonder if being a musician makes you a better mixer. There are plenty of people who are not musicians who make good mixers. I sometimes don't quite understand, just because I can't imagine I can't personally imagine what that would be like, but I mean, I don't know all the big engineers that you hear of. I don't know which ones are musicians and not. I know Pensato is a guitar player. But I really don't know anything about the others, and they seem to be getting the job done. So, yeah, I don't think it matters, honestly. What audio interface do you recommend for budget buyers? I recommend calling Sweetwater and asking them, because there's always new audio interfaces. I don't know because I don't buy them, right? I bought the ones I've got and then I use them. So I would know if I was just currently on the heels of doing research, but I'm not. Granted, I love PreSonus stuff, like their audio box. I think they came out with a newish one. It's kind of cool. So maybe check that out. But yeah, I mean, they all do the same thing, which is a dramatic overstatement. But I don't sell them, and I don't really know as much about what's current. So yeah, call Sweetwater. They'll hook you up. I'm scrolling up to see what I missed. Do you pan hi-hats to the left or right, or is there any trick or technique you go by? I'm a hi-hat to the left kind of guy. Drummer's perspective, if I'm sitting down as a right-handed drummer, my hi-hat's on the left, my ride cymbal's on the right. That's how I like to pan drums. You could make the argument you should do it the opposite, as if you're standing on the other side of the kit listening to the drums. I've always been a drummer's perspective kind of guy. What are your favorite or least favorite songs to play live? For me, songs that never began with an acoustic guitar make it hard to play live because the majority of the time I'm playing acoustic songs. I'm playing my songs live on just an acoustic guitar. So honestly, if they're like a piano-based song, I just won't play them usually. Sometimes I will, but yeah, there you go. Or, songs that have tons of production and it's almost like the production is part of what makes the song cool. Those get kind of hard because you can't pull it off, right? Completely. So it's kind of the evil twin, the evil backside of doing a lot of heavy production. If you play a lot live, you've got to make your live show stand out as well. It doesn't need to sound just like your CD, but it still needs to be good with just one guitar player, even though you had 17 guitars on your record. So that's a hard balance to strike sometimes. I think you guys have run out of questions, which is cool, and I can live with that. I'll just wrap it up. So thanks so much for being a part of this podcast. Again, if you want to attend these weekly and get reminders on your phone, you can subscribe to the calendar at homestudiocorner.com/calendar. And if you aren't subscribed to my email newsletter, I think you should be, because I send out emails a couple times a week, update you on what's going on around Home Studio Corner land. Also to tell you about other things that I'm doing, such as the tracking day that we talked about earlier. You really only find out about that through my email list. Or if I've got sales on my courses and things like that, that's really the best place to find out about that stuff as well. So that is it for me. Thanks so much for listening. If you have any questions or want to join us live next week, I think you should do it. And happy Easter. See ya.